Well, why don't we get started, folks. Welcome to the library. My name is Matt Bose. I'm the Assistant Director. Before we jump into our presentation tonight, I just want to let you know we have some other great upcoming events. You've been watching them on our slideshow here, but we have a bookmark on the table over here, so if you want something to put on your refrigerator, hopefully you'll join us for, oh, come on in, folks. You're here for dog behavior?
Yes.
Yeah, you're right on time. Come on in. We have a talk on the Titanic in 2 weeks, which will be really interesting. It's the New Hampshire Humanities event. And the speaker is going to talk about some of the connections to New Hampshire that some of the crew and passengers had, as well as the history of the event. So that should be a really great talk. That's on the 28th of April at 6:45 in the evening. So let's put that one on the calendars too. Please go ahead and fill out our feedback form tonight. We have this on the table as well. You can join our email list if you want to learn about more of the upcoming events that way and other things going on at the library. And we always like to hear what you'd like to see at the library in the future and where you're seeing our events advertised. That way we know where to get the word out. Okay. So that brings us to our presenter tonight. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Michelle Posage here. This is her second time speaking in the library. And I remember after the first time, as people were walking out, they were running up to me and saying, "You have to have her back. You have to have her back." So she's back by popular demand. And she just opened a new practice in Merrimack, so I'm sure she can tell us a little bit about that too. But tonight we'll learn about all those unruly behaviors that our dogs have, and maybe we'll finally figure out what's going on inside their heads. So,
Awesome.
I'll turn it over to you.
All right, sounds good. Is this, yeah,
Switch that over here.
Thank you. Thanks. And thank you, Matt, for inviting me back. We had a really enjoyable time.
Yeah.
They're such a great group to talk to, and hopefully we'll have a good time tonight as well. My name is Michelle Posage. I am a veterinarian, but a very special veterinarian. I only work with dogs and cats that have behavior issues. So every day of the work week, I am seeing usually fairly chronic or severe types of behavior problems. I'm not a dog trainer, so very happy to refer training to those that do that professionally, but I'm usually working with dogs who have severe issues like aggression or really severe anxiety issues, things like that. But in the course of what I do, I always get these questions about why does my dog do this and why does my dog do that? And those are really fun answers to talk about. So that's what we'll do tonight. And like any good presenter, I did all my research on Facebook. And I had them narrow down to 10, so we have enough to talk about in an hour and keep it reasonable. But there were a lot of questions that came from my friends that didn't make the cut, so I'll just put a few of these in. The one from my friend Jose, he said, "Why does my dog seem to lose all peripheral vision when she is bounding up the stairs at 100 miles per hour, knocking over children, unsecured objects, and anything else in her vicinity just to say hello? And the corollary to this, why does my dog try to occupy the same physical space that I'm in when she says hello?" I mean, you probably can relate to that, right? They're right on top of you. They seem to not know where personal boundaries. Allie asked, "Why does Huckle have a thing for women's unmentionables and tissues and paper towels?" Can anybody relate to that one? Yeah. And Tom wants to know, "Why does Zoe completely ignore my coffee until I forget about it, leave it out, and then I can be out of the room for seconds and she's enjoying it? Worse than a child." So these are ones that didn't make the cut. But the other rule about presentations is to get your audience's attention very early. So we're going to talk about eating poop first, okay? So why do dogs do this, and why don't they do that? Okay? Why? So this is actually kind of a complicated answer. So if we were talking about a mother dog, the dog that was nursing puppies, it would be quite normal for her to ingest the feces of her little puppies because they are tasked with the duty of keeping the nest clean. The other thing that you should know about puppies is that when they're first born, they don't have the ability to defecate on their own, so dogs will lick underneath the stimulate defecation and bowel movements. So if you think about that, it's actually quite normal and natural for dogs to ingest feces. And in fact, in the natural world, that's normal too. So it's not really an abnormal behavior. That said, I bet if you're, let's just show of hands, be honest, how many of you have had a dog, have owned a dog that has eaten poop? Okay, just about half, right? Maybe even more than half if just raise their hand. So it's a very common behavior problem, one that we don't like to talk about or share. But most of you raise your hands not because your dog was mothering puppies. The poop eating was happening for other reasons. Maybe it was the dog eating out of the litter box, or his own poop, or the other dog's poop. I've even seen dogs kind of wait until their housemate's going. Yeah. So we know this happens with dogs when they are in sort of in environments where they're not very stimulated. So like in kennels, or if they're they're kept in shelters, we'll see a lot of that behavior. Sometimes it's just a factor of really not having much to do or much to stimulate them. That's the only thing that's in their penned area, and they're going to show some interest in it. So that's one reason. Here's, I think, one of the main reasons we see it. Dogs don't think it's disgusting to eat the poop. They may actually kind of like the taste of it, or like eating. Dogs will eat anything. We were just talking about, I fostered a lab who liked to eat socks, and Matt's beagle likes to eat maple pizza. They just put things in their mouth, and if you can eat it, they will. They just will. So it's not a far stretch to then go to this idea that they might ingest feces. So it may not taste so bad to them, and we feed these really fantastic diets. We spend lots of money for these, no grain diets that, are lots of nutrients, and I think sometimes there's some nutrients to be had from the feces as it passes through. The other thing is, there are these dogs that, just like a little bit of drama in their lives, a little bit of excitement. And here's the thing, if they do that in front of you, you're never not going to respond to that in some way. There is going to be drama, right? So it's kind of like the little kid in the back of a backseat car, and you're driving along, and he's bored, and he gets a rise out of his little sister because it's less boring than just sitting there. And some dogs will do it just to get attention sometimes. I think more often than not, they just enjoy the activity of eating poop. Yeah? Okay. So that's number one. Let's see what number two is.
So can I just ask you, nothing to really discourage is, nothing you're going to do to discourage it?
You can interrupt that behavior in a couple different ways. One would be to change the taste of the poop. You actually do something that makes the feces not taste good. And so they make products that you can put on the food that your dog eats that will, enzymes that will change the palatability of the feces. It's if you needed to do that, but apparently you do, okay? So that's one. There's like a couple versions of that. One's called forbid and one's called deter. There's another way that you can interrupt that behavior, and that's just making sure that you go out with your dog and clean up after them as soon as they go. And if you're consistent about that for a period of time and you interrupt that pattern, sometimes you sort of reduce the frequency with which you see that. It's when you send them out in the yard and you're not supervising and not interrupting every single time that you're going to have a hard time breaking that pattern. That's a good question. Thank you. Is there any others? Yes.
Hi. My dog does that.
Yeah.
So I was just curious, what does it do on the inside?
So is there a negative consequence to eating?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there actually is. If they're eating their own feces, not really a big deal. If they're eating the feces of another animal, that's a really good way to transmit parasites. So if the other animal has an intestinal parasite, then your dog can get parasites that way. Yeah, so it is probably a good idea to deter them from doing this. And if you do have a dog that likes to do this, maybe no kisses on the mouth.
Once you see that, you don't have to worry.
Right, lots of teeth brushing too. All right, so number 2 is why do dogs look guilty but then misbehave again at the very next opportunity, right? So if you came to the presentation I gave here last year, you'll probably know the answer to this one already. The real thing, the thing is that they don't actually feel guilty. They may look guilty, but they may not feel guilty. And that's an interpretation you've made based on what they look like when you caught them in the act of doing something naughty. So in the canine world, we have a set of behaviors that are called submissive gestures. And submissive gestures are meant to turn off dominant gestures. And when you found that your dog has eaten your very best pair of shoes, or gotten into the trash, or tore apart the paper towel roll for the 100th time, the way your body looks is very angry, but to the dog it looks dominant. It looks like you're asserting yourself. So the very the most logical thing for your dog to do is try and turn that off. And in the dog world, that means offering submissive gestures. So their ears will go back, their head will go down, their body will be low, and they'll often be kind of trying to avoid eye contact and maybe even rolling on their back and showing you their tummy. And as humans, we're going to interpret that, he feels bad about what he did. He does, he feels bad, right? Not so much. He doesn't. He is not saying sorry. He is not saying that he'll try harder next time. He is only trying to calm you down. That's all that's about. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Questions about that one? Okay, all right, that one made sense. So related to this is odd behavior number 3. Peeing to say hello. I figured if we talked about poop, we also have to talk about pee. I am a veterinarian after all. That's what, we deal in these sort of things. So how many of you own a dog that upon greeting piddles a little bit? Yeah? One of you, 1 or 2 of you. So I do. I've rescued a Wheaten Terrier who does this, not with everybody, it's usually men. It's usually when she first meets them. It's usually when she's on carpets, make it easier to clean up, right? Yeah. So puppies do this frequently too. So many puppies are, by maturity, going to offer you submissive gestures. And urinating upon greeting is a submissive gesture. It's a way to defer to a more dominant individual. And it has nothing to do with house training. It has very little to do with that. It has more to do with that individual looking assertive to the puppy or to the dog if you're unfortunate like me and have a puppy that doesn't grow out of that behavior. Because when people interact with dogs, right, and they're greeting them, they do dominant body language. They lean in, make eye contact, and reach over the dog's head. If you happen to be a male versus a female, you have a stature that the dog recognizes and oftentimes finds a little intimidating. And so those, what are perceived to be friendly gestures, or meant to be friendly gestures, are perceived as dominant gestures from the dog. So again, the most logical thing to do is to offer you a submissive gesture to try and turn that off, so you get a little bit of pain. But if you really pay attention, their ears are back, they're low to the ground, they're making themselves look small. It's all associated with those submissive gestures that I was talking about earlier. Yeah? Now that's one kind of pee when we breed. We have another one, and this is just pure excitement in young puppies. Sometimes when they get really excited and their bladders aren't really fully mature, sometimes we get a little bit of leaking, and that'll happen too. The important thing to know about both of those issues is that if you treat them like a house training issue, and you correct the dog, and you say, no, 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 right? And you try and tell them that they're doing something wrong, you'll make this problem worse, right? Because it's not about house training, it's not about them making a choice to void. What's actually happening when you correct them is you're applying more dominant gestures or more excitement gestures, right? And you'll actually find that that kind of perpetuates the problem. So, usually, it's the individual interacting with the dog that needs to change their behavior. So maybe we get lower to the ground, we avoid eye contact, we let the dog come to us, we pet under the chin instead of on top of the head, and maybe we just kind of keep our greetings kind of low key, let the excitement die down a little bit. And that should solve that problem. All right, any questions about that?
The puppies, when do the bladder, when does it mature?
Yeah, so most puppies will grow out of this by 6, 7, 8 months, somewhere in there. Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's go on here. Odd behavior number 4. Why do dogs gobble or guard food? Any guarding dogs in here? Any dogs that like wolf down their food as if they couldn't taste it? Yeah, yeah. That would be my lab. We have to even use like one of those feeder bowls that are like a puzzle to sort of slow him down, just so that the Wheaton gets to eat a little bit before he wants to go over and take her food. So the answer to this question has to do with the fact that dogs are ancestors of wolves, not ancestors of cows. Okay? A wolf is a predatory animal. A cow is a prey. It doesn't hunt. And a predator needs to work very hard to acquire a meal. They have to outsmart their prey. They have to put a lot of energy to finding a meal. So if you get a meal, you're going to be more prone to keeping it for yourself, or not saving it for later, not putting it off. Right? You worked hard then. If you're a cow, you wouldn't know how to, hunt for food if you had to, right? All you know is you put your head down and you eat the grass in front of you. And if one cow gets too close to that little patch of grass, you just move over and you find a little bit more. There's no inclination toward that. There's no genetic predisposition. But in our dogs, the ancestors of wolves, there is a genetic predisposition. So it's not totally abnormal to see dogs guard their food. It is something that you can train or socialize out of them if you do it right. And so oftentimes you'll be encouraged by trainers when you get a puppy to make sure that they're comfortable with you approaching them while they're eating. And I see people do that, but sometimes they forget the step that would really make that effective. You don't want to just bother your dogs while they're eating. That actually might sensitize them. It might make them a little paranoid about their food and maybe want to eat it faster, right? I was describing this lab that I had fostered, and he had taken a sock, and as soon as he knew that I was going to get closer to him, he swallowed it, right? So he wanted to eat that faster, so he didn't want me to take it away. Because in the past home I think he was in, a lot of people took things out of his mouth. Well, if you keep going to your dog's food bowl and messing with their food and taking it away and disturbing them, they might actually become sensitized to the idea that you got to eat quickly or you got to guard your food. So if you're going to do any training with the food bowl, what you want to do is approach the food bowl, but then add something extra special inside of it and leave, right? So if you repeatedly approach them while they're eating, you put in some treats on top of that dry kibble, and then leave, well, what is the dog going to think the next time he sees you coming? He's thinking about the food that you gave him. Yeah, he's going to be excited to see you approach. And so that's how you train out some of that guarding behavior that you sometimes see with dogs in their food bowls. So anybody have a dog that picks up their food, like their kibble, and then carries it out of the room and then goes and eats it on the carpet. Why do you think your dogs do that?
I always thought it was easier to pick it up off something soft like carpet.
Maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure that that's untrue.
I mean, the carpet's not far from her food dish, so she picks it up, drops it there, then rinses it off.
Right. So maybe she wants to enjoy it one piece at a time, and it's easier to pick it up off the carpet. And here's another theory, right? Because from an evolution standpoint, it makes no sense to pick up your food and then let go and then eat it again. So we're looking from an evolution standpoint. Why would they feel a need to bring the food somewhere else? Well, maybe it's because they feel safer in that other area, yeah? When we look at where people put their food bowls for their dogs and their pets, a lot of times it's against the wall, right? Okay, so it's in a corner, or it's in a tucked away space that people aren't going to step on their food bowls, right? And so if the dog wants to eat out of the bowl, what they have to do is this, right? I can't see what's coming at me if I've got my head buried in the food bowl and I'm really enjoying my food. I have to let my guard down. But if I have my back toward everything else going on in the household, I can get startled real easily. So sometimes I think dogs will bring their food to a place where they feel like they can kind of have a vantage point and understand that they're not going to get spooked or startled. And sometimes they just want to be comfortable while they're eating, and they'll just go over the carpet and lay down and enjoy their food one kibble at a time. How many of you saw all the cucumber cat videos that were on Facebook? You guys see those? Yeah. So there was this thing that went viral with cats eating their food and people sneaking a cucumber behind them on the floor. And then when the cat noticed it, they could have a fear response, a startle response. And I'm not suggesting that you do this, but it kind of makes the point I wanted to make, where if you're thinking about why would a dog move their food around like that, it's probably because they don't want that to happen to them. And I don't think there was anything special about the cucumber, just in case you were wondering. I think you could do that with a head of cabbage or something else. It was just the fact that it wasn't there when they started. Okay. Questions about eating behaviors? Any other odd eating behaviors? Yeah.
On the dogs that gobble their food, is the best method just to get those dishes that slow them down? Because I have a lab, and if I put his food in just a regular dish, he will wah, 3 bites, and he'll eat.
Yeah, and then you feel horrible for them because they have to wait like
So
another
I
8
get
hours.
these bowls where he has to work around, and he still finishes before I have a dog.
Yeah, I like those. I also think there are other ways to slow them down, different types of ways that you can put the food in and they have to roll around. For my lab, I usually put part of the meal in a toy called the pickle pocket, or pocket pickle. I always get that one confused. It has deep pockets in it. It's a rubber toy, and he has to kind of squish and chew to try and get that food out. There are times in the summer where I will take his food, I'll go on my back deck, and I'll throw it into the grass, and he has to forage for the kibble. It will occupy him for an hour. He has to find every single little morsel of kibble. And I wouldn't do that if he was eating, day-old pizza, from the neighbor who threw it into my yard. But my yard's pretty safe, and he doesn't eat things that he's not supposed to. He just loves working for food, and it occupies his brain in a healthy way. This is what we do now with a lot of zoo animals who don't have a lot of environmental stimulation. They're stuck in kind of the same type of environment day in, day out. And one way you can engage them and give them a better mental health is to occupy their brain with foraging, and they find different ways to put the food in things and encourage animals to work on getting that out. And I think that's a wonderful way to occupy dogs too, especially if they're really heavily food motivated. The other way I'll use food, and this is another thing I do with my dog, is half of the food goes in the bowl, the feeder bowl with the ridges, and make sure that it slows him down. The other half, especially if I know I'm going to have time, I will use for training, right? So if I'm working on a specific exercise that week, some of those kibbles are used as training treats. And he'll still not, he'll be getting the same amount of calories, which won't, he won't be getting them in the bowl. Any other, yeah.
Yeah. My dog loves jalapeno peppers.
Wow.
I don't know why, but he's a beagle. She's beagle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it cause problems to eat a jalapeno? So for some dogs, that would not say well.
Is it because like he likes to be a vegetarian?
So we're hang on to that idea because we were going to talk about that in a minute here when we get to grass eating.
Yeah.
I think it just goes back to this idea that number one, dogs' taste buds aren't the same as ours. They develop a different palate, obviously because they're number one, right? Yeah. I think a lot of times they like things they're not supposed to like. So had anybody used that bitter apple spray that's supposed to keep them from chewing and stuff and found that their dog loves the taste of it? They can acquire tastes just like people acquire tastes. So that's an interesting one. I have not really met many dogs that like jalapeno peppers. Number 5.
Can I ask a question? Does that stuff work? Like, I have a puppy and outdoor, are mushrooms bad? Mushrooms that just kind of grow naturally?
Some would be and some wouldn't, right?
So it's kind of hard. Does that stuff work to put it on?
It works for some dogs, but it dissipates pretty quickly, especially if you were using it outdoors. I don't know that you get any long-lasting effect from that. So probably what I would do in that behavior is train the dog to leave it, right? To not choose the mushrooms through training, through behavior modification. Any other odd eating behaviors? Yeah.
I just think it's funny. We have a Yorkie that as soon as she hears the food being prepared, she runs to her little toy box, grabs a squeaky toy, brings it back to her food bowl, squeaks it, and runs around in a circle and just waits for her. It's like she's catching her prey or something. It's very cute.
So she brings her toy to the food bowl,
squeaks it around, brings it right from the toy box, which is another room, to her food bowl consistently, morning and night. Squeaks it, sits, waits.
That's a production.
Yeah.
That's,
I don't know.
maybe she's sharing her food with her favorite toy. That's so cute.
Kind of funny.
Yeah, it's a different one for sure.
We didn't train her to do this.
Yeah. Well, well, I'll comment on that, and I'm sure he didn't. The funny thing, though, about dogs is that if you show any sort of interest in what they're doing, like, so one day she did that, and y'all pointed out, look what she's doing, that's so cute, like, what are you doing? And you talked to her a little bit, and did you train her to do that?
Positive reinforcement.
A little bit of, positive reinforcement, because, that's not a bad behavior to positively reinforce, it's kind of cute, but there are a lot of times that our dogs will repeat behaviors that have gotten our attention, either in a positive way or in a negative way. And so sometimes they get conditioned to behave in really odd ways because that's how they were successful getting something that they wanted. And sometimes they're just silly behaviors and have nothing to do with us, but that's some food for thought there. Howling. I had a video of a dog howl. You've seen a dog howl. How many of you have dogs that howl? Oh, our beagle friend,
Yeah.
of course, yeah.
Let's call it Fritz Weatherby.
What kind of dog?
It was a golden retriever.
Golden retriever.
Yeah, since then, but-
Yeah. What does your dog howl at, Matt?
I think he smells animals
And-
sometimes.
yeah. Sirens?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes
Yeah.
if he hears a truck, a car, or a siren or something.
Yeah. A lot of dogs will howl at sirens, right? And so any high-pitched noise, like a musical instrument, I had a boxer would howl at a flute that we played at home, and sometimes if you howl, then your dog will howl back. Especially, I mean, you've probably seen videos of huskies doing this. If you're on social media, that's a very popular one. So howling is another one of those behaviors that throw back to the descendants, and from the fact that they're descending from wolves, and howling is the means of communication to the wolves, and it is something that will carry over a longer distance than barking will. So it's a way to communicate. So a lot of dogs are howling just to talk back to what they perceive as something talking to them. And in this case, a siren from a police or an ambulance may trigger that same sort of behavior of howling.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
My dog doesn't howl. I have a Westie that cries over like beeping sounds. So like,
Yeah.
I mean, and it can be one beep. It can be, you know, the microwave going off. And you could be racing to hit the button before it actually goes off and it sirens 3 times. And he's in tears.
Right.
Yeah, just really miserable. And that's gotten worse with age. So is it fear? Is it, what do I got going? Is it discomfort because of the pitch? What do I have going on?
That's what a lot of people believe about the sirens, is that the dogs are howling because the sirens hurt their ears.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case when we see dogs howling, because when they're really truly howling, it's they're throwing their head back, and they got their whole body into it. It's this really nice long howling sound. It sounds a lot like the siren. That is different than what you're describing, which I would classify as whining.
Yeah.
And whining in that context, in response to a sound like a beep, is most likely due to a fear, a phobia, or an anxiety. I see a lot of dogs who have these types of sound sensitivities that are. So here's a common one. So the microwave beeping is something I see a lot, where like the little tones that our phone makes every once in a while, that will set them off. The chirp from a smoke detector, that's battery, it's dying, and it just goes off, I don't know, every minute for just one whoop. That will actually drive a lot of dogs into severe panic attacks, and it's really a phobia. It's almost at that point where it's an irrational fear that causes them to panic for some dogs. And for other dogs, it's just really very annoying and a little bit scary, and so they cope better. But I've treated dogs that won't even come in the house because of those types of noises. So they find that it's safer outside than inside because they're worried about hearing those noises. This past winter, I was treating a dog whose sound sensitivity had to do with the heat, the furnace turning on. And so it can be really odd things. Doesn't have to be based in reality. That's what a phobia is, right? Fears are productive. Fears are good. Fears are what keeps us from doing things that are maybe a bit dangerous, right? And if you're exposed to something over and over again and nothing bad happens to you, your fear goes down. So that's what you're supposed to, your brain's supposed to realize, oh, you don't have to pay attention to that sound anymore, because nothing happens when the beeping happens, right? So you don't need to worry about it. But in a phobia, it goes the other way. And every time they're exposed to it, they get a little bit more sensitive. And so as your dog ages, each exposure just makes that a little bit more scary.
So I don't want to derail from the presentation, but is the best response to kind of just continue to comfort him and kind of keep things as even-keeled as possible? Should I remove him from, I always try to shut down the sound as quickly as possible, because if it does happen more than once, he does gets pretty anxious. For the most part, I've tried to just kind of say, but it's okay, come sit with me for a minute and we'll be good. And it seems to kind of dissipate at that point.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's helpful as opposed to, like, I don't want to support the fear, but I also don't want him to
I
be in
know.
panic either, so.
Yeah, you hear that a lot. You hear, oh, well, you shouldn't comfort your dog because then you might be like
Reinforcing.
positively reinforcing the fear. But in actuality, that type of emotional response isn't really a good candidate for conditioning because they're in a different part of their brain.
Yeah.
They're in that fight or flight zone, and there's really not much learning happening anyway. It's akin to you being pushed out of a plane during a skydiving lesson. You're not going to be doing your lesson up in the sky. You're not learning up there. You're going to do your learning down on the ground because it's the only way that the instructor can get your attention, right? So there's really not much you can do once they're in that zone. There's a lot you can do before they get to that zone. So there's a type of desensitization exercise that you can do with the beeping to make that the predictor of something good rather than something bad. So if you took a recording of that beep and you lowered the volume to just a very quiet sound, and every time you played that sound, you gave your dog a cookie. He hears that sound, he immediately gets a cookie. Sound, cookie, sound, cookie, sound, cookie. What's going to happen in his brain? He's going to hear the sound and go to an emotional state that's more positive, right? And when you get that happening, you start to increase the volume.